from where you at. I came here for vengeance, watch your back. No need to defend, I'm on attack. Sorry they can't reply, but I guarantee they had a blast. Pop, 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 I be on the next only, yeah, I am fresh to death.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Long Haul Mentality. I am your host, as always, Nick Bagley, and I have my first returning guest, Dr. Dwayne Jackson. How are you, man?
Doing great, Nick. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, brother. So we're going to get rolling. You were already like trying to get into it. And I was like, no, we got to slow down because I want to get all that good stuff. And we already kind of discussed it a little bit here, but the name of the game today is to talk about some negative interactions when it comes to peptides. I think it's a very important conversation. And this is a conversation that has come up because I saw you talking about it on another podcast. And I wanted to give you a little bit more room to run and talk about what it was you were talking about. Because nobody's talking about these things, right? And like everything you hear is take all the peptides you want and it's endless results and you're going to get shredded. You know what I mean? So I think it's really cool that you're kind of voicing this. So I want to give you that opportunity to chat a little bit here.
Absolutely.
So let's get started with the like kind of where you started on the last one of like the difference between the AMPK and mTOR and how those two pathways work and what that looks like in the world of enhanced bodybuilding.
Yeah. So if we, it's funny because, when I talk about this stuff, you always have a little bit of a bias against, say, the scientific knowledge, in some of these, some of the bodybuilders, some of the fitness advocates and whatnot with peptides on board. But really, when it comes down to signaling for muscle growth, like why we, eat before we train, why we eat after we train and all these different things, it's because we're actually trying to fundamentally, in the most simplest way, modify the AMPK response that we have with calorie restriction, heavy training, and everything else, which is permissive, which means that we can override it really well to get mTOR signaling up. But the problem is that you don't want to be running compounds, peptides per se, that are going to be multiple of them at the same time in that recovery window, or at least that prevail through that recovery window. Because during training, we turn on AMPK signaling. This is it's science, but it's it's physiology, right?
Right.
And so when we're in that AMPK signaling cascade, that's when we're breaking down stuff and we're in a catabolic state, which is what is great. Exercise is what we call very permissive. So we can turn on that catabolic state so that, as soon as we shut it off and we go into recovery, and especially if we eat in recovery within, 2-hour window or whatever, depends on our fed state, then we can shut it down real fast, get mTOR on board, and then we start building back that tissue and put a little bit back more than we had before we had the training session. And so what, one of the things that I'm really trying to drive home here is, although, a lot of these peptides, MOTs-c, even like RETA, AICR, they're all very, very valuable tools, I guess, in this, crazy world that we operate in. But if we stack them on top of each other, we balance signaling we bias signaling toward AMPK cellular pathways. And not that we're going to stop mTOR from happening, especially if, these are, athletes that are taking a whole bunch of anabolics.
But it's going to blunt the responses.
You are definitely going to be running a background of AMPK.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily need to be there in the, in the stackable sense that we see.
Right. And I think one thing to like get out in the open, very first thing here is like, I work with a peptide company. I like peptides. They do work. Like there has been, I've really enjoyed using RETA. I've liked SLU. I've seen some very good stuff with that because, to be completely honest, I really try to use as little clean with people as I possibly can. And SLU has been able to be something that can kind of be a placeholder when things need to scale with stimulants. So I've really enjoyed peptides. I do really enjoy them, but I think the issue that I have with the peptide community is that like everything is a golden egg, and the way they talk about them is like how they talk about the synergies of these things of like SLU does this and 5-amino does this and MOTs-c does this, and you can run it all in this way, but they don't ever talk about like what could potentially happen if you run them too long or too high or all those different things. So like, have you seen some stuff from people running too much of these?
So in terms of like side effects, if we're talking muscle growth, they're going to be, very, very, they're going to be minutia based, but we're going to be, if we're stacking up, keeping it on top of, say, the mTOR and AMPK signaling, if we're stacking multiple of them, especially things like when we run a background of metformin, okay, which a lot of bodybuilders do. Metformin is a non-permissive AMPK activator. And so right off the bat, so if we run in a background of that and we run it for years and everything's going good and we've got, 300-pound Olympians that are running this stuff, that doesn't say that we can't build muscle. But when we start stacking all kinds of biases, now we have MOTs-c, which is relatively permissive, moderately, because it has a relatively short blood half-life, but it has a relatively long cellular half-life, which is signaling half-life, which is much more, that's what's really happening.
Right. Yeah.
So, So in terms of these compounds, we really don't know at this time, if we're stacking all these together, whether or not we're blunting muscle growth in these, in big mass monsters and everything else when there's a lot of anabolics on board.
Right.
But what we do know is if we bias toward AMPK signaling throughout the workout window, at the onset of working out, hey, it's great, but it's more endurance based. That these, like the MOTs-cs and the AICRs and all these, are really going to shine. Because in most bodybuilding contexts, we're not really pumping the mitochondria as hard as everybody thinks we are. We're not working under those pathways, when we're doing sets of 5 to 12 of reps, right?
Right.
And we're doing 15 sets.
But from a standpoint with the mitochondria, I think a lot of people focus on the nutrition side of things more so than the training side with the mitochondria. So do you think there's still benefit to those peptides during that time to improve mitochondrial function from a metabolic standpoint of like processing food and whatnot?
Well, so this is where this minutia, that people say, oh, the science guys, what do they know, right? Well, I was an open class bodybuilder, so that's kind of what sets me out a little differently. And I studied exercise physiology because I loved muscle performance so much. So one of the so in terms of metabolic efficiency in these things, but the metabolic efficiency is going to be taken care of over that workout window. So if we're if we've got a background of metformin, which has a very, very long non-permissive response for AMPK, and it, when we take 500 milligrams in the morning, 500 milligrams at night, over time, we have this background of AMPK already running. Right. So then when we start stacking on top of that other peptides within a window of recovery, right? So we think a cellular half-life here, then we aren't really maximizing our effects of our training and our nutrition on muscle growth. Absolutely not. And then also, we're not really timing it right, because there are times where we can do this when we're not training or after the workout window. Maybe after we've been fed, and then that we've already had our nice mTOR response, muscle protein synthesis has gone up, then it starts petering out, then it works quite well. But if we're in a state where we're trying to diet for a show, for example, right, or diet in general just to have the abs showing, the calorie restriction alone is going to amplify AMPK, because that's the whole thing. It's a nutrient sensitive pathway.
Right.
And so in terms of getting lean, if we're already, calorie restriction, then we're already kind of taking care of that pathway quite well. And then, like I said, metformin's been such a big thing in the last, 5 or 6, maybe 10 years. Is it? Oh yeah. Yeah. Like there's a lot of guys, a lot of the big guys like running metformin in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I personally don't use it with anyone. I have.
And I mean, I don't, I watch what I do. I come in, I don't do any more prep stuff. I come in, to help people who are actually, struggling with their health afterward. And that's when I see these protocols. So
interesting.
and the heightened, glycogen reloading response we get when we have things like metformin on board, because it increases our insulin sensitivity. That's great. But when we start stacking the other stuff and it's going into our recovery window, then we're not going to completely blunt the mTOR response at all.
Right.
But some of them just stick around a little longer, I think, than people think they do.
Right. So I think like the gist of kind of what you're saying here is like these things do work. We just need to pay attention to like how much we're allowing them to work by stacking multiple compounds on top of it. Right.
It's like you said at the front end,
the ultimate goal. Right.
100%. And like you said at the front end, that because something works and then something else works and then something else works in our, in the fitness community in general now, not just bodybuilding, that means, well, all three of them are going to really
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, this past year in 2025 is when I started to dabble in the peptide world, and Kuza was one of the guys that was like you should really look into these. And at first I was like, man, shut up. Like these don't fucking work. Like I've seen CJC and fucking all those things pop up a million times. Like those have been around forever. And I've always said the same thing. I was like, I think BPC and TB500 were great. I've used them a number of times. They've worked awesome for me. I think growth hormone peptides are a waste of fucking time. And that was like my extent of knowledge of peptides. And then he started to kind of show me some things. So I decided to kind of play around with a number of different things. And what I first did is tried like one at a time. Right. And tried a couple different things just to see what the response was. And then from there, I started to try them in different combinations. And to be completely honest, like, I don't know that I noticed a difference when I added more compounds. Like, I think SLU, MOTs-c, and RETA are some amazing products that I really enjoy. But outside of those, I'm just not fully sold on a lot of these. You know what I said? Do you have some that you think work really well and that you like to use?
So for myself, and other athletes, I've used MOTs-c as a conditioning peptide, which works really, really well when we're hitting the mitochondria with high level cardiovascular exercise. Okay. And the real experiment is how many watts are you pushing in a certain heart rate zone for how long, when you have it on board and when you don't have it on board. And I do see big changes with SS31 and MOTs-c as a combo, where SS31 doesn't have any real AMPK, direct AMPK effects. It just, basically stabilizes our mitochondria so that they work more efficiently. They're a good energy signal. But with MOTs-c, when we have that running before, like pre a heavy cardiovascular training, that's when we see it really shine in terms of mitochondrial function, because it is literally going to improve the ATP output that we can put out during a time when we're actually activating mitochondria really heavily, which is not during fucking 4 reps of squats.
Going to take a quick break from the podcast to bring a few things to your attention. First off, as I was going through the YouTube analytics, I noticed that almost 70% of my watchers are not subscribed. So if you're watching this right now, please do me a favor and click that subscribe button. Every single time I get a new subscriber, comments, likes, and shares, this helps spread the podcast more, and I really, really appreciate you guys. This podcast has no paid sponsorships, so the best way for you to support my channel is to support my sponsors. So Labrada Pro Series is my supplement sponsor. We have a full line of products with some new ones coming. The pre-workout is on the way right now, and the new Labrada Nutrition RTD pre-workout is about to hit the market as well. On top of Labrada Pro Series, I also have Gasp and Better Bodies, and then I also have Authentic Aminos. Please go support these companies. Use my code BAGLY10 for Labrada Pro Series, BAGLY15 for Gasp and Better Bodies, and BAGLY for Authentic Aminos. Thanks, guys. Let's get back to the podcast. Man, 4 reps of squats. You just made my knees hurt saying that. But so now let's get into, like, obviously we can't go into rec application here, right? But obviously there's going to be a lot of people here that's like, first off, I know you said there were some comments on the other post about like, oh, the guys are taking anabolics, so like this shift in taking these peptides isn't going to do that much or whatever. So I'd like to address that, but then I'd also like to kind of have a conversation around what it would look like for someone who's an enhanced athlete who wants to use peptides to make them the most efficient. Because it's like people are putting them in off season, people are putting them prep, people are trying to use these things like 365 now. Like they're trying to use them all the time. And that I totally do not agree with. So let's first talk about like the anabolics versus using peptides and what that world looks like of those two things coming together within the same system.
Yeah. So with anabolics, what we're really trying to achieve is from a cellular response is, and we'll make this way upstream. So we're not talking about signaling pathways, is improved protein synthesis. And so if we're improving muscle protein synthesis, what we're doing is we're improving recovery. Right. And that's going to be the best way for us to, take in, 4,000 to 6,000 calories and make it go to the right places.
Yeah.
Right. When we're talking about using these mitochondrial peptides, which, are, for the most part, endurance-based peptides, that's when that's when timing becomes, in my world anyway, much more important. And like you said, cycling is very, very important. Cycling peptides as opposed to just, taking every one of them that you can afford. Yeah. And then, and a lot of times people like can only afford to utilize them at very, very low doses. They get expensive, right? If you don't have the right connection.
Extremely.
Right. And so then they start taking them at like low doses that really at the end of the day, I think they're pissing in the wind.
A drop in the bucket. Yeah.
And so you're way better off, cycling through them and using them during certain periods or periodizations of your training and where you are in your competitive cycle if you're competing. And where you are in your, muscle building phase versus conditioning phases, right? So that's really the essence that that I think we need to start thinking about, as opposed to just taking everything that we think works.
Right. Yeah. So now in the context of like enhanced bodybuilding, when you say conditioning phases, what does that look like in that scope? Like it sounds like you're talking about like the heart rate thresholds and these things. So are we looking at, if we were to utilize something like a MOTs-c the way you're talking about, are you looking at wanting people to move into like a HIIT style cardio? Is it still like if I train and later in the day I do 30 minutes of cardio and I take my MOTs-c like a little while before that, is that going to be enough to move the needle on that side of conditioning? Or when we talk about conditioning, are you talking about like endurance athletes, right?
Yeah. So in the bodybuilding, so I mean, there's all kinds of athletes, and I work with everybody. Sure. So in the bodybuilding context, since most of your listeners are probably going to be in that context,
in that realm, yeah.
You're gonna want to have these AMPK modifiers being most prevalent at that cardio phase. So if you're utilizing them at the front end of your workouts, for example, so if we're talking conditioning and bodybuilders, I see conditioning as how good a shape you're in. So that will come with body fat levels, right? But it also comes with like how your ability to sustain high volume workouts, get your cardio done, and not have your heart rate up at 175, 180 beats per minute for the next like 4 hours afterwards, which can can happen when we're out of condition. We all know that when we're a little bit heavier than we need to be, that's where we're at. Now, if we're looking at competitive bodybuilders in the open class, like guys that are even just 225 pounds plus, it's going to take, moving that body mass is going to put you in, if we're talking about cardio, still going to put you in heart rate zones that are going to be much heavier than someone who, say, 140 pounds on a treadmill just walking. Yeah. So that's where MOTs-c would shine in that kind of pre-cardio phase. But having it on board, in relatively adequate dosing over throughout your training period, that's going to be fine. But it's in that recovery period when we really want to do our best to shut down the AMPK signaling, which comes with any mitochondrial peptide and any caloric restriction. We want to shut that down, right? And that's why that feeding window, like if we're gonna move the big fucking rocks here, it's not going to be missing a meal and taking MOTs-c. It's going to be having your meals,
Yeah.
before and after
Yeah.
training, so that you go into it in a fed state and you come out of it in a fed state.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, uh, along the terms of like these AMPK peptides, the thing that I feel like a lot of people really like zone in on is insulin sensitivity, right? They're like, oh, these peptides, because they do the XYZ, they're going to increase your body's ability to utilize insulin. And there's an argument there that like a better insulin sensitive system is a more anabolic system that helps it grow. So like, what do you say to that? Like that's my curious.
100%. I mean, 100% that, if we're more insulin sensitive, then we're going to be able to load glycogen back into skeletal muscle much quicker if we're even using any adequate amount of glycogen anyway in some of these training paradigms that we use to grow muscle. Because, the fiber types that we're trying to activate during these training sessions, they aren't generally ones that we are, worried so much about. Like, so basically, insulin sensitivity goes up a lot during training anyway, and the insulin response afterwards goes up after training.
Right.
So unless you're type 2 diabetic and you're training, or you're type 1 diabetic doesn't matter because you're going to be clamping it with insulin anyway. But unless you're type 2 diabetic, which I don't see a lot of guys that are, with the bodybuild, then really the effects on insulin sensitivity by taking a couple of peptides isn't going to be the main response. And the other thing too is that although, if we do indeed increase insulin sensitivity and it's, doing a great job of what we want it to do, we're still activating other pathways that are, maybe contrary to what we're trying to achieve. So again, we're always going to have a competing signal if we go, into the signaling cascade between AMPK and mTOR, which is our anabolic response. So AMPK is a catabolic driver, and mTOR is an anabolic driver.
Right.
And so our training window, absolutely, we want that to be as catabolic as possible, because that's going to turn on a greater mTOR response afterwards. And exercise is a beautiful way to do that in training. And so, it really comes down to when we're looking at the peptides, and that's why I mentioned AICR. Like, for example, it's got a very, very high AMPK bias in strength. It's non-permissive. Like if you're pounding AICR, throughout the workout window, and then it pervades for about 3 hours as a strong functional signaling molecule, then we are going to blunt some of the effects that we want to see in terms of the mTOR response after training, eating, and everything else. And so that's the biggest issue, is like we have multiple different, we call it pleiotropic effects of any drug. And so when we're only focused on the one effect, we forget about all the other effects that may be happening. And if we're trying to optimize, which everybody talks about fucking optimization now, if we're trying to optimize, then our best bet is really not to be driving that AMPK signaling pathway when we're looking to turn on mTOR. So like I was mentioning, like metformin has a very high chronic signaling for AMPK. So we've already got that sucker on board. That increases insulin sensitivity, or at least increases our sensitivity to getting glucose out of the blood and into where it should be, liver and muscle. So that's really, in essence, the basis behind not just taking them because, this is a mitochondrial enhancer, this is a mitochondrial. We all have different ways of getting to that result.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, like very surface level, look at these and go, okay, this product is supposed to increase my fat burning. I am going to go to the gym and I want to get leaner. So therefore that means I take this pre-gym, right? And for the most part, you would say, like, if I'm going in to lift, that's a bad idea. If I'm going in to do cardio and do something that's going to tax my cardiovascular system, that might be a better option. Is that kind of what you're saying there?
I would say it's not. I would use different terms there. I'd say it's not the optimal idea to be doing that right before a strength training session, and it would be more optimal to do it during your a phase of where you've increased your cardiovascular stuff. So in this case, for bodybuilders, a lot of times it might be for increasing heart health.
Right.
It might be for, burning a few more calories after the training session. But the key here is really this whole permissiveness of the signaling. And so like retatrutide, for example, is very permissive. And so you can take retatrutide, get all of the benefits of a triple agonist. And so, the insulin sensitivity benefits, the calorie burning benefits, some of the muscle preservation benefits and everything else. And as long as you're getting enough calories in, we could shut it down pretty easily by a good feeding period in terms of catabolic AMPK signaling.
Right.
And so, that having it on board, long half-life, everything else, it's still, you can, your training and everything should have relatively the same effect. MOTs-c has like a moderate effect on AMPK bias. So again, and it's even though it's got, a relatively short half-life, it's got a relatively long functional duration. And now mTOR in the post. So if you took MOTs-c pre-workout, if you feed yourself afterwards, we can shut off that signaling pretty well. It's not, according at least to what we know in the data, which isn't a lot, but in terms of signaling pathways. And really, when the people listen to these podcasts, you have people that are relatively science-based, and they have people that can be like, fuck the science guys, we've been doing this for years. Absolutely. And in fact, in the 90s, we didn't have these mitochondrial enhancers. We had late 90s, we had quite a few of these peptides that were floating around. You just had to get them in different places.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But again, the focus was more on feeding,
right,
and training hard.
Right.
And that's really, what I'm trying to drive home is that, we got a lot of guys now that are spending their money on peptides and not on food.
Oh my God, Jesus, that's a whole nother podcast, Wayne. That, like we can't go down that rabbit hole right now because I still have.
And by the way, I'm peptide biased. I did my PhD in neuropeptide Y, so I am very, very peptide biased. They're very powerful agents,
correct, right,
in the right context.
Yes, agreed.
But at the same time, just because you heard a 30-second snippet on a podcast like this, made into a Instagram reel. It doesn't really mean that you just take them all.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a very important thing to we already knew that. We already know that, right? Because it's not like you're going to, if you just got on anabolics, you're not going to take test, primo, mass, trend, debol. You're not going to stack them all together. We know that's fucking dumb. So why are we doing that with something that increases fat burning, But yeah, I really I agree. I'm on the same side as you. I like peptides a lot. I use them with a lot of my clients. I think they are awesome. But I think in the first few years of your bodybuilding journey, stick to the basics. Stick to the things that we know already move the needle. Eat, train hard, take your testosterone, sleep well, those kinds of things. Do that first, because I think well beyond just the outward I am shredded that you get from competing, there is a wealth of personal growth that can happen when you're in those moments where you're looking in the pantry, looking at those fucking goldfish going, I want to eat all of these. You know what I mean? I think there's something to that. And I think that people just getting started, if you're listening to this, just stay away from the peptides. If you want to go enhance, you want to go down that route, do that thing, but stick with the basics for right now. Learn how to suffer first before you start taking RETA, because I promise it'll be even easier after that.
And it's funny too, because RETA is an amazing, amazing peptide, right?
I love
or set of peptides, analogs anyway. But the funny part about it is it does blunt appetite quite a lot. And just because you're seeing your abs doesn't mean that you're growing muscle. I mean, I'm 168 pounds now, and I used to be 260.
Right.
Kidney transplant on board. So I've got mTOR shut down, mostly the drugs I'm taking because of, anti-rejection medication.
Right.
But RETA is an interesting one because a lot of people start with that. And the biggest problem with it is you don't for me to get to my size and go up a weight class every year, I had to force feed. Yeah. And I've tried RETA, and I'll tell you right now, it's really hard to force feed when you're on that stuff. Even if you're microdosing.
I did not have a good appetite when I was a bodybuilder. We've talked about that before. And like, I couldn't imagine, like I hear people talking about wanting to run it in the off season. And I'm like, look, I understand that it has a great impact on lipid profiles. I've seen some amazing stuff come out of very low dose RETA on people's blood works between A1C numbers and cholesterol numbers. It's incredible. Like that's one of the first things that I've seen move an HDL number while on cycle and move it in a positive direction by a number of points. You know what I mean? So I think that's huge, but I think it's fucking stupid to try and take any in the off season, especially if you're somebody like myself or you that had a hard time like getting up there. Like, well, I'll keep that one to myself. I'm not going to put up somebody else's information out there, but yeah. I think you got to be careful with RETA for sure. I think it's one of those things that like you use enough to make the noise calm down, but then from there you have to use a little bit of discipline, because the last thing you want to do is slow your stomach down so much that you have issues with digestion.
Well, yeah, and the GLP-1s, like, I mean, they're actual, I mean, RETA's still in phase 3 at the end of its phase 3 trials. But you know, tirzepatide and semaglutide, those are prescribed for moving the needle on your blood glucose, HbA1c, and your lipids. Like that's the only way you're going to get them, through the actual, you know, regular legal channels. And so, of course, we're going to see those effects because they've done, you know, Big Pharma has done all of the work on that, and that's basically what they're there for.
Yeah.
The lower calorie intake does help a lot with those things too.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the problems with any of the GLP-1s is, and this is, you know, well established in clinical trials, is that when they take subsets of the data and look at the intake of food, there is a propensity to not want to eat as much protein or fat. And so, you know, although you may be, you know, achieving these effects, which are awesome for cardiovascular health, you're also blunting the things that are the hardest for us as bodybuilders to be able to do, is get that intake up, right? So
So I'm curious on, we haven't talked about SLU at all, and I'm curious as to your thoughts on SLU, because like I enjoy that one. It's usually one of the first that I go to, because like from a cost effective standpoint, I think it works pretty well. You know, it's one of the ones that like low barrier to entry, because if somebody doesn't want to inject themselves, you can use a pill, that sort of thing. And I've played around with a number of different ways of utilizing it. Like I've done it pre-workout, and I can tell you I sweat like hell. I've done it like middle of the day when I'm not doing anything, right? And I'm curious as to like, what do you think about SLU in the context of utilizing it for a peptide?
Yeah, so in terms of SLU, it's mixed. It's got mixed reviews. For me, the biggest problem I have with SLU is that there's just a lack of data other than anecdote. And so from a when you look at the actual compound from a cellular perspective, it should do the job quite well. And it's funny because I have a mixed bag of people that have had, you know, amazing results like yourself, and I've had other people that have said it did nothing for me and I wasted my money.
Yeah.
If dosing, you know, if we knew dosing was clamped for everybody, and you know, and we could look at it that way, we could probably do a decent anecdotal, you know, evaluation. But really, like pretty much all the peptides, you know, when we're talking about like, you know, BPC, or we're talking about TB500, it really comes down to a person trying it and does it work?
Very true.
And this goes back to stacking multiple things. It's really hard. I mean, in research, we don't change 4 fucking variables at one time and make it, you know, a recommendation at the end,
right?
Or conclusion. So yeah, with SLU, I've seen a number of people really think, you know, that it's worked really well for them. And if it does, then hey, go ahead and, you know, use it if you're going to do research on yourself at your own discretion. Yeah. But in terms of like my own personal, like I try most everything that I'll say, yeah, this works for me at least. SLU is one that I haven't utilized much because one, I have a transplant on board, and there's just not much data out there. And when I say not much, I'm talking like it's scant at best.
Yeah.
So this is really truly research on yourself.
Yeah. It's interesting because SLU's been one of those ones that like, I feel like in the last couple of months went through this phase of like, you can take as much as you want, right? Because the research that is available apparently this, I don't know what the scale is, but like the dosing that the rats were given apparently equates to some to like multiple milligram doses for a guy my size. Like I know people taking up to like 100 milligrams of SLU, which like I took 1,000 micrograms. So 1 milligram.
Yep.
And like, I don't know how people could even do more than that because like I was a sweaty mess. Like it was disgusting.
Yeah,
And I
well,
know, go ahead.
well, so it's funny you say that because when it first came out and it was like, I think it was like 500 microgram dosing that was first sold.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, this isn't even in the friggin' ballpark of what we at least know because it's in the high milligram range.
Right.
That they've tested it in the preclinical, like, rodent studies. And so, yeah, and then all of a sudden it went up. You saw like actual like dosing go up to like, 500 milligrams. So it's, went up a whole order of magnitude. So, or several orders of magnitude. So the key to, most of these compounds is, like you said, you start low and slow if you're going to do that research on yourself, and you test it out yourself. Don't start at, some dose that, some guy online said that this is the dose you start at. And it's,
right. Yeah. Your first cycle, you start 1,000 milligrams and test, hey guys, this is the same thing.
Right. It's the concept, right? Because it's always minimal effective dose because longevity in this sport is already a problem. And, in terms of like even survival. So we really, really want to make sure that we're, using minimal effective dosing and only ramping up where needed. And that's why you see, dose finding studies and everything else that occur.
Right. So from what I'm gathering here, like, do you see any context to any peptides for an off-season bodybuilder?
I do. Like, I mean, in terms of in off season, if we're going to be doing like a push to grow, definitely BPC 157 and TB 500 in my world have done a world of difference. And I've done it. I've pulled it out, put it in, pulled it out, put it in. And I definitely notice a difference in joint pain when I'm training with those on board and my recovery. Much better recovery. And I use relatively, high dosing compared to what other guys use because I'm using, 1 milligram to 2 milligrams of each of them every day during those phases. So definitely see it. In terms of, I really like MOTs-c. I love it. I think it does have a great effect on body comp, but I think a lot of times if people were to look at their energy expenditure throughout the day, when they're on these compounds that are mitochondrial enhancers, it's because they can move much more faster and more efficient. So they end up with just a better calorie burn without feeling the effects of having to go out and walk 10,000 steps or whatever it is aim for.
Yeah. So with MOTs-c, I know it's got a longer half-life on it, and I've heard people talk about like once a week dosing or twice a week dosing, that kind of thing. And I've also heard people talk about doing daily. So where are you on that one?
Yeah, so MOTs-c has a relatively has a short half-life, but it's got hours of some of the estimates are up to 24 hours of a functional duration or a signaling duration. Right. And so, so every other day would work well. And that's why, I look at it as more of like, on your days that you're not in the gym, pumping iron, and maybe you're going out for longer walks or, you're doing some cardiovascular training in the gym because you don't get out for walks. That's when I would be more inclined, if I was going to do it on a, non-daily basis, I'd bias it toward times where I'm actually trying to increase metabolic rate and metabolism, because we're already going to be doing that in our weight training sessions, and we're not going to be utilizing the endurance muscle fiber types as much as we would be in the other times.
That makes sense. But aside from like BPC and TB 500, these peptides that like the AMPK drivers, like you don't see any place for those in an off season, correct?
You want to know what? If in the off season we want to increase like heart health and those types of things, absolutely. Okay. Because like I said, with MOTs-c, it's relatively permissive. So when we feed, we can override that AMPK signaling or that catabolic signaling.
Okay.
Yeah. So it does have a really good place in it. It's more so when like I was saying, it's not that any one of them are going to be evil and stop us from growing muscle. That's where the misconception of my
Right.
last podcast I did with Milos and them kind of came out. But a lot of guys got it, but a lot of guys didn't for obvious reasons. But you're not going to be optimizing things if you're stacking multiple of them that have different permissiveness and different half-lives, because then you don't even know where you sit in the anabolic cascade. Like, so if we go back in time and we say, okay, we don't have any peptides on board, we know that if we eat before and after training, that we're going to drive anabolic signaling after training, right? And we're not going to have a lot of breakdown of muscle tissue, at least in the training phase, when we are actually in a catabolic state.
Right.
And so it's just, it's just a matter of like, because peptides are really just optimization molecules, right? So if we're trying to optimize it, we might as well time it right if we're going to spend the money on it. And that's really the key to what I'm really trying to drive home.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
Last question, because I've got a call coming up at 5:00, and I feel like we could go on this forever. So we might have to have you circle back around at some point. But when it comes to longevity, right, we're going to shift just a little bit, because that is something that I'm focused on now, since I'm past the bodybuilding phase of my world. Like, I still want to be like relatively muscular. I still want to be lean, that sort of thing. But, a lot of people are using peptides for longevity. And we know that like mTOR being ramped up forever is not exactly great for longevity, right? Where do these peptides fit into that realm of longevity?
Well, that's where, where most of the, if we're going to talk about like where most of the benefits are going to occur, it's going to be in that, right? And so again, it comes down to when we're talking about bodybuilding and, bulk phases or, off-season phases, these types of things, they can improve, the longevity response, because AMPK is that. And that's why fasting drives AMPK, is, seen as a longevity, approach to longevity. We can do that without fasting, which is really, really nice. But it won't mask all of the negative effects that you're having by overfeeding and by taking a handful of anabolics at relatively high doses. Like, so you're not going to save your life with, a couple of, $150 peptides. That really comes down to, blood work monitoring and making sure you're keeping your blood work, blood work in check, if you want to have some time in the sport.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. But at the end of the day, when we're building that much muscle over time, and it's relatively short periods of time, we're really not focused on longevity anyway. Right. Let's face it. So, it's kind of like pick your pathway. Because, and sport to me is, everything. I'm an athlete first.
There's a trade-off.
And that's why I'm 160 and change pounds right now, because I'm focused on maintaining a strong physique, a lean physique, but at the same time, cardiovascular health and kidney health, with the kidney I have, in my belly from a buddy. So it's really important for us to we have to delineate the two, because, they're basically, you can't have them be inclusive, and in a holistic sense.
Yeah. We may have to try and reschedule a podcast for another couple months from now and go down the longevity rabbit hole, because I think I really do like peptides, man. I really enjoy them. And I want people to understand that, like, this conversation is not meant to like scare people away from peptides. It's about educating in order to understand that, like, just because, like you said, you saw a 30-second, 60-second reel of some guy talking about this other peptide doesn't mean you need to stack it on top of what you're already doing. Yeah, I think it's what we already know, that you should be hard focused on your diet, on your sleep, on your training, on your cardiovascular system. You focus on those things, and those are going to be the big needles. The peptides are going to be what they are. They are there to kind of enhance the system, just like testosterone is. It's there to shift the needle a little bit, not hammer a response, as always. You know what I mean? Like that, we already know this. Why do we have to now learn this through peptides? You know what I mean?
And healthy bodies build more muscle. And I always tell people that, these bodybuilders that have had heart attacks and everything else and bring them back to the stage, they notice that they get way bigger responses from less stuff
100%.
because their body isn't inflamed, their glucose is stable, their lipids are stable, and their blood pressure is stable.
Right. And the number one thing that you have to always be aware of, anytime you take a compound, there are side effects. Muscle building is a side effect of testosterone, right? If you're lifting and doing that stuff. There's also the side effect of atherosclerosis and those kinds of things. So like these are all side effects. So we have to make sure we don't know what happens when you stack 6 of these together. We don't know what happens when you even take one of them because there are no longevity studies on these. Like we're still looking to see that stuff come out. So like don't be in a hurry to take everything possible is the number one thing I think both Dr. Jackson and I can both hang our hats on and say that's the summary of this podcast.
Absolutely. Focus on what works. And, you know, exactly. and, you know, if you got your sleep and your everything else, you know, feeding and workouts all in line, then you can pull one in and see if it enhances, you know, one or all of the things that that you've moved those big rocks with.
Yep. 100%. But Dr. Jackson, anything you want to promote before we sign off here, man?
No, just if you like what I have to say, you can definitely check out my Instagram page and all my socials are at DRDN Jackson. And I've got a new podcast, and Nick, I'm going to get you on it, called The Vitality Manifesto, and it's based on my book that I'm going to be bringing out this year. And cool. And it really does focus on how do we perform at high levels from 20 years old all the way through to like 90 or 100 when we drop off the face of the earth. And that's really health span is what we want to really focus on, because at the end of the day, we do want to live and enjoy our sport.
I named my business The Long Haul Fitness for a reason. Like I want to teach people how to do this for a period of time, for a long period of time, not just like a short stint and short-term results. So I'd love to come on the podcast. I'm excited about the book too, man. That'll be really cool. So
yeah, thanks, man.
I'll definitely be watching out for that. But for everybody who is still watching right now, please be sure to do the YouTube thing, like, subscribe, share it with your friends, leave a comment down below about what you thought about the podcast, and we'll catch you on the next one.